You know, the book of Revelation, it can feel a little overwhelming, right? All that complex imagery and those serious warnings. But what if I told you that tucked inside is a single verse that holds this incredible key to understanding God's promise of protection, even in the middle of chaos? Well, today we're going to unpack Revelation 2:24, a powerful message of mercy that is just as relevant for us now as it was back then.
So to really get this promise, we're going to go on a little journey together. First, we'll start in the ancient city of Thyatira to get the context. Then we'll unmask the dangerous deception it's warning us about. We're going to find out who exactly this protection is for, pull out 5 key lessons for you and me, and then wrap it all up by looking at the incredible heart of mercy that's driving this whole message.
All right, first up, let's set the stage. This message wasn't just written into a vacuum. Nope, it was a direct communication from Jesus to a very specific group of believers living in a city called Thyatira. Okay, here's the verse itself. Listen to this. Unto you, as many as have not this doctrine, I will put upon you none other burden. You hear that? This isn't some vague suggestion. This is a direct, authoritative promise straight from Jesus, and it's drawing a really clear line in the sand between two different groups inside the church. So what does this all mean? Well, it's this powerful reassurance of God's justice and His protective care. It shows that He absolutely sees those who stay loyal, who are discerning, and He promises to shield them from the consequences of the deception that might be happening all around them.
Okay, but to really get this promise of protection, we have to understand what it's protecting us from. The verse warns against this doctrine and what it calls the depths of Satan. So, what in the world does that mean?
The source material we're looking at makes a really critical distinction here. On one side, you've got God's power, based on the spirit of truth. But on the other side, you have what's called the wisdom of men. These are teachings that come from our own reasoning, our intellect, our human appetites. The source even connects this idea to the number 666, symbolizing a system that's completely rooted in human thinking instead of divine revelation.
So let's look at the Greek for a second. The word for doctrine here is didache. Now, it can mean any kind of teaching, but in this context, it's pointing specifically to counterfeit spiritual instruction, a belief system that comes from man, not from God. And here's where it gets really fascinating. The Greek word for depths is bathos, and this isn't about some profound spiritual truth. No, it's the total opposite. It's talking about these cleverly hidden deceptions that sound really deep and spiritual, but they're actually designed to lead people away from a real, genuine walk with God.
And where does this deception come from? The verse points a finger directly at Satanas, the adversary. It's saying that these human-centered teachings are ultimately from him because they just create confusion. They replace a real relationship with Jesus with a bunch of intellectual arguments.
And you know what? This isn't a new problem. The Apostle Paul warned the church in Corinth about this exact same danger. He wrote that a true, lasting faith can't be built on clever arguments or human wisdom. It has to be founded on the undeniable power of God. So, if that's the big warning, then who gets the promise? This brings us to the most hopeful part of the whole verse, figuring out who this group is that God protects, the unburdened remnant. The verse singles out a very specific group, calling them the rest in Thyatira. But who are they really? Well, the Greek word here is loipos, and it literally means those remaining. This points to a faithful remnant, the believers who just refused to buy into the false doctrine. They intentionally stayed outside of its corrupting influence. Plain and simple, they're the ones who stayed loyal. And what are they being spared from exactly? A burden, or baros in the Greek. Now, this isn't just any old difficulty. It means a heavy, oppressive spiritual obligation, the kind that only comes from false teaching. Jesus is promising that He will not put that man-made weight on His faithful followers. So the promise here is incredibly clear and totally just. If you resist the deception, if you stay in the truth, you will not be held accountable for the errors of other people. God sees the difference, and He protects the faithful.
Okay, so what does this ancient promise actually mean for us, right here, right now? Well, this one verse can be distilled into 5 incredibly practical lessons for our own spiritual safety. Here's what it all boils down to. First, trust that God protects you from the fallout of other people's mistakes. Second, stay loyal and be discerning so you can avoid deception in the first place. Third, know without a doubt that God sees and distinguishes the faithful from the unfaithful. Fourth, you've got to actively practice obedience and stay vigilant in the truth. And finally, never ever forget the foundation of all of this. God's incredible patience and mercy.
And you know that last point on mercy? It's the key to everything. This verse in Revelation isn't ultimately about judgment. It's this amazing window into the merciful character of God.
The Bible actually shows a pattern of God's patience. Over in Acts, we read that God overlooked times of ignorance. See, his goal isn't immediate condemnation. It's to lead people to repentance and to the truth. And the Apostle Paul is a perfect example of this. He says he received mercy for the terrible things he did precisely because he did them out of ignorance. God knew his heart, even when his actions were completely wrong. And this all leads to the most powerful expression of this idea, coming from Jesus himself on the cross. He asks for forgiveness for the people executing him. And what's the reason he gives? They know not what they do. Ignorance isn't an excuse, but it does evoke God's mercy.
And this just reinforces the whole mission, doesn't it? God's purpose in sending Jesus was never to condemn the world, but to save it. His posture toward humanity is always one of restoration and salvation.
So, when you put it all together, the takeaway is just so powerful. God is rich in mercy, especially for those who have been misled, who followed false traditions without even knowing it. His goal is not to condemn the blind, but to open their eyes and to save them.
And that brings us right back to today. That warning to the church in Thyatira is just as relevant now, in a world that is jam-packed with competing voices, all claiming they have the truth. So the question this verse leaves us with is simple, but it's profound. In a world that's so many doctrines, how do you listen for the one that is true?